I'm Danielle, and welcome to This Enchanted House. Today, I am going to review the book, The Little Book of Cottagecore by Emily Kent. This one, because kept getting recommended to me because of algorithms, I type the word cottagecore on a regular basis, and of course the internet figured out, gee, she likes cottagecore, who would have guessed? So, this one kept coming up, getting recommended to me, and I thought it just came out this month, and I pre-ordered it, and I figured, why not? I'm into cottagecore. This is more about cottagecore lifestyle than cottagecore aesthetic, and really, that kind of lifestyle has existed, called lots of different things, from back to the basics, simple living, authentic living. I've seen lots of different names for it. And this is more, but cottagecore as an aesthetic likes handmade, likes that type of thing. And so the aesthetic often also is one of those places where, if you've seen my video on differences between aesthetic, lifestyle, genre, and what was the other one? I'll put a link to it right here so you guys can go check it out if you're interested in how these terms get intermingled and things. But this is more about lifestyle and crafting and making things than actually aesthetic. But all those things are part of the aesthetic as well. So, just off the back, discovering the joy of living simply and authentically with the Little Book of Cottagecore. Whether you live in a wooded meadow in the heart of a city, you can enjoy sipping your own homebrewed tea, curling up under a homemade quilt, and crafting aromatic candles. With beginner instructions on a variety of cottagecore hobbies, from learning to cross-stitch to caring for bees, you can choose which elements of this lifestyle resonate with you. Experience the wonders of nature and the rewards of your own work, and the true joy found in the simple way of life. This is... First of all, one of the reasons I bought it is I do like the cover. I think it's very cottagecore, very cozy. So the book itself is divided up into different hobby areas, and I thought I'd kind of go through them one by one. There's gardening and beekeeping, tea time, baking breads, pies, and cookies, herbal remedies, candle making, cross-stitch, sewing, or cross-stitch and sewing, quilting and embroidery, and soap making. So just my first impressions is this is an okay book. It's nice. She does make the point that, it doesn't matter. You don't have to live in the cottage to do cottagecore. Even the lifestyle part of it, you can adapt some of this homemaking stuff to wherever you live. Other than that, though, she doesn't really talk a lot about what cottagecore is or how it means to her. This is very much just a book of crafts, and with a cottagecore title. And so, keeping that in mind, we're going to go forward. The first chapter on gardening, she mostly concentrates on container gardening, which is a great place for a beginner to start. Or someone who doesn't, if you don't have a yard, you can still grow plants in containers. I have a yard, but I still do a lot of container plants. These plant, the one behind me, and my ivy. Well, my ivy would actually be okay, maybe outside. Depends how cold it got. But this one, it has to be a container. I have my herb garden on my kitchen that, so I can have herbs year round, but that takes actually a little bit of cultivation. But she talks about it kind of in general, and what kind of pots to get, things that grow well. She concentrates mostly on food, but growing flowers in pots is great too, especially if you can get perennials that you can just keep in the pot and keep all year round, or keeping year round, and they come back. Or my favorite thing is get annuals. I go to my local greenhouse every year and get a couple and supplement my porch with annuals. Though a lot of annuals you can actually keep year round too if you bring them inside and kind of nurse them. But she doesn't really talk about perennials or annuals, or or a lot of things I would expect you kind of go over with a beginner gardener, like zone hardiness, some plants, if you live in warmer zones like Arizona or Florida, there are plants you can't grow because it actually gets too hot for them, or you have to grow that. You have to be you have to keep them inside. So I mean, she doesn't talk about indoor versus outdoor too much either. So like, I don't know. It's a nice starting point, but there's like a lot missing that I would expect in a beginner book. But then of course, like this is something you can do, just container gardening. You can get books just on container gardening. You can get books on starting gardening. There's a lot of, I'm gonna say this is a recurring theme for this book is kind of feel if you're interested in one of these particular hobbies, you're better off just getting a book about that than starting with this book. But if for an overview, it's not bad. She also gets into growing and doing berry patches, which are great if you have space in your yard. I have a strawberry patch in my yard. I really want to start a raspberry patch as well. Yeah, she has like a lot about, now those she has a lot about, like growing characteristics, water, when the plant, how to keep them when the harvest. Then you get to growing herbs, and growing herbs is just like, it starts here and ends here, and like, growing herbs is like, I would have expected more, especially since later on there's a whole chapter on herbal remedies. Growing herbs should be like, that's involved. Like there are books just on growing herbs, and some herbs do really well in pots, some do not. For me at least, most like mint. I have a mint pot, and it does fine. My potted basil, I end up having to replant every year. The one year it survived, my nephew came and ripped it out of the pot and it died. So it basil I have luck sometimes. So I've had some luck keeping it year round, but a lot of my plants, usually my herb plants, especially like right now when it's cold, they do what I call wintering, where they're getting less sun, even though they're inside and they're warm, they're getting less sunlight, so they're not growing as abundantly as they would during spring and summer and even fall, because the sunlight they're getting is just a lot less. And that's fine. I know the prep for that. I usually trim them down right before winter. So I'm going into my own herb pot things, which actually should be its own video. But so yeah. And then we get into beekeeping, and I really don't think of beekeeping as just a beginner thing, because beekeeping, even minimally, has an investment involved with equipment. Like, I mean, herbs, yeah, you have to buy the pots and you have to buy the soil. That stuff is actually, you can get relatively inexpensively. And sometimes if you're in your community, you can find people who are like, hey, I'm getting rid of some pots, you want some? Or, hey, I have some leftover dirt, and you can share. Beekeeping requires some really specialized equipment. Although I should say I've never kept bees. I just know the area I live in, there's a lot of people who do keep bees and do keep bees as a hobby, and they're very involved with it. So it seems like a strange thing to say, put in a beginner, like, oh, you're just starting with cottagecore, here's something to try. I mean, she's got, as far as I can tell, very in-depth instructions about how to do this, where to get the bees, how to keep the bees. But once again, if I was going to keep bees, I'd almost rather go get a book on how to start keeping bees. And I almost would, in this case, because it's something I'm really unfamiliar with, but I do know people who do it, is like talk to one of my friends who does keep bees and says, okay, walk me through everything I need to do and help me maybe do this, get this first year started even, you know? But because beekeeping is great. We need bees. We saw them starting to die off, and scientists got really scared because they are one of the number one pollinators. But yeah, so the second chapter is on tea time, and as someone who has worked at teas and is a big tea aficionado, though I will say my morning drink is always coffee. I don't know. For me, morning is coffee, afternoon is tea. There's nothing in here. This is actually a very good start. If you're just interested in tea, maybe I would recommend her starter guide tea, because I've never seen a book just on tea. Maybe you guys have out there, and if you have, let me know below. But yeah, this is actually a very, like, there's like certain, like, people think, oh, you just boil water, pour on the leaves, let it sit for a bit. There's like a whole art to it, and like for when we do, I've worked with the tea lady who does steampunk teas for like Michigan steampunk events and stuff, and there's like, she's got kettles going, and there's timers, and you know, things are timed to come out just right. So there's a lot of like fussiness, I guess, involved with making a really good cup of tea, but she gets into it. She goes versus bags versus loose leaf versus strainers. She gets into iced tea and cold brewing, which are also interesting ways to make tea. I'm not a big cold tea fan. I don't know. I'm not a big cold coffee fan either, unless it's got lots of it's cream or it's in a shake or something. So it just maybe I'm not in the cold brewed drinks anyway. But she talks about difference a little bit between the difference between British and Japanese, or I should say Western and Eastern maybe. Tea. So if you're interested in tea, this is definitely a good book to get, and you're maybe interested in some of the other stuff too. There's some good intro stuff here too. So yeah, I guess that's the best chapter, and I really enjoyed it. Next chapter is the baking chapter, and she spends a lot on bread making and bread making in the process, and someone who's made bread but is not the best at it, and still I wouldn't say I'm still learning. I'm still developing. I guess I'm still developing that skill set. But who has a fair amount of knowledge, and just in baking in general, I do bake a lot. So she spends a lot of time on bread making, and there's some bread recipes, and then suddenly it just switches to other bakings like pie crusts and things where there's actually a lot of technique involved with those too, and I'm kind of surprised. I'm going to talk all this technique about bread making. Oh, and here's some other baking recipes too. And once again, this is one of those things where you can just get a book on bread making. There's books on baking. I just got Claire Saffit's Dessert Person, which is if you are someone who wants to bake, and she does some savory too. She talks about how savory counts as dessert too, right? Her book just came out, and honestly, if you're just interested in learning how to bake, I think I really like hers because she gets really detailed and talks about different ways to tell things are done, and it's very instructive. And she also has a YouTube channel now, and I'll put a link for that below if you want to see what kind of stuff she makes, if you're interested in seeing some of the recipes she's done. But so yeah, but if you're interested in tea and baking, then yeah, this is a good, once again, herbal remedies. Oh god. So first off, let me say I love herbal remedies. I've used herbal remedies. My favorite, I'm a big person for using chamomile to help you get to sleep, or certain things for headache, or teas for headaches and stuff like that. Here's where my issue comes with almost every book on herbal remedies, where they say, oh, there's all this commercial medicine and it's going to poison you, or it's bad, but herbal remedies are natural. Now, I'm not a doctor, and I'm going to say whenever you're sick, you should consult a doctor. But herbal remedies largely treat symptoms, whereas modern medicine can often attack the cause. Not always, and a lot of times, so if you have a cold and you don't want to go with, you've got a runny nose and a little bit of headache, and you don't want to take something over the counter, then yeah, herbal remedies are great. But if you have a chronic issue, you need to see a doctor. If you have migraines or headaches all the time, and the tea helps take care of the headache, but you're still getting headaches all the time, you need to go say to the doctor and say, I'm getting headaches all the time. There might be some underlying cause to that. And I point this out, herbal medicine goes back, thousands of years in lots of different cultures. And a lot of it is because they didn't have the science to say, oh, we don't have MRIs, we don't have microscopes, we don't have all this stuff. But we do know that if you take this, it helps alleviate this symptom. It helps alleviate this pain. It helps alleviate the runny nose, the sore throat, the stomach problems. So that is my issue, and she doesn't really differentiate. She doesn't talk about doctors. The first thing I look for when someone's talking about herbal medicine or any alternative therapy is they say, hey, this is what this does, but you still need to consult a doctor. You still need to consult a professional. And I didn't see that in here, and it's always just a pet peeve of mine. That said, all herbal remedies are straight up stuff I've done before, and there's nothing in here that I would think is that, at least I've only read through this twice, so I might have skimmed over something, but most of this seems, they all seem kind of on the level. If you've got this book and you've read it and you see something that screams out to you, oh my god, that's really dangerous, let me know below, or post it below so people know. But the other thing is, since she had this chapter on growing plants and she talked about herbs, talking about growing some of the herbs that you would use in the herbal remedies would make sense to me. And like I said, she just kind of skipped over it. So she talks. Next chapter is actually candle making, and it's a great chapter, and it's a great chapter beginning candle making. But once again, if you're just interested in candle making, you're better off getting a book about candle making. But if you're interested in a lot of these, this is a great book to get, because her candle making chapter is it's all stuff I've done before. She does rolled candles and poured candles. She doesn't do dip tapers, which I was kind of surprised because that's not a hard one to do either. It's a long process. It's a lengthy process, but it's not that hard to do. And that's where you start with the wicks. She talks about priming them, which is great. And you dip them in the candle, dip them in the wax, let them dry a little bit, dip them in the wax, and you get those really pretty nice tapers. And if you want to get really creative with them, you can actually do different colors. So you start off with one color, and then you move to the next color, and you move to the final color. You can get like a gradient. So, but that's the only candle project she didn't do. But maybe a space or time. But there was nothing in there. It's a good chapter on candle making, and it's a great start. So if you're if you're interested in tea, if you're interested in breads, if you're interested in all these, and you just want to buy one book to kind of get an introduction to all of them, I'd say this is a good book. So on to sewing. Next up is the cross stitch and sewing, and I thought that was a great chapter. It had a lot of great beginner projects. Cross stitch, it's one of the few that's the other thing, is there's not a lot of diagrams in this book, and I would think you would want more. What did I skip? So yeah, she does include, for cross stitch, she does include the cross stitch pattern for you, and talks about how to do basics. And cross stitches, it's basically one stitch. It's that X stitch. There's two ways to do it, and she goes over both ways to do it. So in sewing, she talks about how to make your own curtains. Curtains are a great beginner sewing project. She makes them seem, reading through, a little harder than they actually are. Curtains are great because they're straight stitches, and it's something you can put in your home right away. And it's a great way to, if you have never used a sewing machine before, to try out, because you can they're straight stitches. She does get a little bit in the fabric choices, but not a whole lot. And fabric can make a difference too when you're doing sewing. Like if your first project is curtains, don't do sheer. Sheer fabric is really hard to sew. But if you're just doing like a nice cotton or a linen or some kind of blended fabric, you're gonna be fine. And she gets into doing some even little fancy bits, how to make valances and ruffles, and it's a nice little beginner guide if you want to make curtains. So then we get on to quilting and embroidery, and so quilting is something I used to do a lot as a teenager. My mom was really in it, and the only reason I don't do quilting now, well, there's two reasons. First of all, quilting does take a lot of work and a lot of effort, especially to make a full-size quilt. And secondly, I have so many quilts that I don't feel like I need to make any more right now. Sometimes I'm tempted. I'll see a really pretty fabric and go, oh, that'd make a great quilt. Or I'll see like a pattern design on someone's quilting quilting design online or something. I'll be like, oh, I'd like to try that. But the quilting, what she has, the quilting, she talks a little bit about piecing. She's doing smaller projects, so it's good for a beginner. She talks about the difference between tied quilts versus regular quilting. So when you're quilting, the whole concept behind it is there's two layers of fabric. The top, the layer you're supposed to show, and sort of like the under layer, and there's the batting in between them. And then quilting is the art of attaching those fabrics together so that the batting doesn't slide in between them. Tied quilts, you usually are just making little ties throughout, and it's not really quilting, but it's sort of a quick way to do it. And then she gets into the quilting and doing quilting stitches, and she has a small project involving that. It's great, but I didn't really see anything on embroidery, which is really weird. The other thing that weirded me is cross stitch is kind of more of like embroidery. Well, quilting is like a type of embroidery. I don't know. I don't know why those chapters were separated, I guess, when they could have all been kind of together, unless, or separate out more. And then she doesn't really get into embroidery. Like my grandmother did embroidery like crazy. Like I have embroidered pillowcases and table runners, and they're gorgeous and I love them. There's not a whole lot about actual embroidery, like doing really pretty florals or anything like that. But I mean, I guess the quilting kind of counts as embroidery. Like I said, the way this book is organized kind of confuses me sometimes. So she saves soap making for last. And once again, with soap making, it feels like beekeeping. Soap making doesn't quite require the investment that beekeeping does in terms of equipment and materials. There's a lot of like everyday things you can use. But soap making when you're actually making soap and using there's two types. When you see soap making, there's usually two types of things they're referring to. Melt and pour soaps, where you get the soap, you melt it down, you add your scents and interesting things, and you put it in a mold, and then you pop it out and you have soap. But it was already soap when you got it. What she's doing is the other kind, which is actual soap making, which is using lye, which is incredibly caustic, and combining it with fats and oils for a process called soapification. And it's interesting to do, and it's great to do, and I'm not saying no one should do it ever. But this is one of those things, like, if you're in a small little apartment, it's kind of scary to do it, because you could have a really bad reaction. Don't want to get the lye on you, because it can burn your skin. You need a place for the soaps to cure and the soapification process to happen. There's fumes involved. Like, it's not something I would recommend to do in a small space. It's something a beginner can do fairly easily, but once again, even though she does a really good job describing it, once again, I say get a book on it. Get a book dedicated to just soap making. And there's a lot of great YouTube videos out there. There's a lot of great soap makers on YouTube who do videos and talk about it. But yeah, so it's not a bad chapter in terms of actual description, but it seems a weird fit along beekeeping if you're trying to start with someone who's a beginner. Because so much of this other stuff is very beginner oriented. But so overall, like, the book it feels uneven, and it feels like there are some things that got skipped over that it's okay that they got left out, but it seems strange that they would leave them out. And I don't know. So once again, I did look up the author. I couldn't find anything about her online, and her bio on the book says Emily Kent lives a simple life in Massachusetts. She loves rambling in nature and savoring freshly baked bread with homemade jam. And then I was like, well, wait a minute. You talked all about berry patches, and you didn't do a chapter on jam? That's a great beginner thing to start with. I mean, it does involve some equipment. You have to go buy the jars, but the jars you use over and over again. You need a big pot and a pressure cooker, but I mean, everyone has Instapots now. I don't know. I've never tried doing candy with an Instapot. I've just used a regular pressure cooker, but you don't always even need the pressure cooker. And you talk about growing your own vegetables and all this stuff. Like, canning goes along with it, because that lets you have those things all year round. And that was like, if you're into canning, why wouldn't you include a chapter on that? That's a great chapter to include. I'd do that over soap making or beekeeping, but it's not my book, so I didn't write it. I'm just reviewing it. So would I recommend it? Not necessarily, I guess. I guess if you like the cover and you want to have the cover on your bookshelf, that's one thing. If you're interested in these topics and you want kind of just an overview, but see if you want to go further with them, yeah. But there's nothing inherently cottagecore. Like, there are lots of books on these topics. It doesn't relate to like how cottagecore makes you feel. There's nothing personal in this book. There's no personal testimonial. It's a book of instruction, basically. So for me, like, had I had seen my review, I would have probably given it a pass. I think for a lot of people, would be a pass. But if you're new to doing homemade and DIY, and you wanted an overview of these particular crafts, yeah, it's a great overview. But beyond that, if you're interested in any one of them, I would much rather you go out and get a book on that topic, find a YouTuber who's on that topic, explore that topic in depth on your own. So, but yeah, it's a cute look. It is a cute book. It is a cute cover. But for me, it would definitely, if I hadn't already bought it, be a pass. If you like this video, please give it a like. If you would check out some of my other videos, if this one interests you, maybe they would too. And you can even subscribe so you don't miss out on the latest videos. I'd love to connect with you guys on social media. My Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are below. I have a Patreon because I'd like to do some more interesting cinematic stuff, but I'm still just new at this. So, but if you want to get in on the ground floor, that's down there too. I hope you guys all have an enchanted day, and I'll see you guys next time.